Hey guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 25th episode of my series where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it had, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. So for the last 80s classic I'm going to talk about for now, as hard as it is to whittle down, I decided to go with Slick Rick's legendary debut, The Great Adventures of Slick Rick. For about 35 years now, Rick has been revered as one of the game's best writers for good reason, and he's specifically praised as a storyteller. His wit and creativity opened the door for other storytelling albums that would come down the line, like Prince Paul, Prince Among Thieves, or Kendrick Lamar, Good Kid, Mad City, and even the stranger concept albums like Deltron 3030 or Dr. Octagonacologist. I have to assume that they were inspired by Slick Rick, at least to a degree. It's not like storytelling didn't exist in hip hop prior to Slick Rick, but he was, to my knowledge, the first one to make a collection of tracks where everyone is insanely focused and his verses play almost like a movie. His dope yet albeit somewhat goofy voice perfectly fits this one-eyed flamboyant pimp he portrays, and his storytelling is so vivid, nobody ever questions his street credibility. It's a tough-to-manage line he walks on, where he's hilarious and smart and doesn't take himself all that seriously, but he still was massive in the streets. It isn't like the majority of his fans were white college kids. Legends like LL have been extremely open with how Slick Rick was about that life, and you know you're the real deal when Fat Joe says he's seen you put in work with his own eyes. He was amazing at setting up a character and getting you invested in them, and then by the time it's over, you realize it's only been a few minutes, but it felt like longer because you get so much detail and personality in that small sliver of time. Even in Children's Story, Rick manages to paint this character who's troubled and does some bad things, but ultimately was a good kid at heart and could have had a completely different life if he wasn't profiled. It's just a testament to how talented he is as a writer. And the casualness and almost amusement that he tells this story with really highlights that this is a daily occurrence for people in these areas, and it gives the track almost this kind of eerie vibe. Same with one of the final lines on that song, "The cop shot the kid, I still hear him scream," has this dark, poetic edge, and it speaks to the people who see these acts of violence who are traumatized and often go unaccounted for. Even the cop who pulls the trigger more than likely ends up with lifelong trauma, but average privileged people who've never known someone who got killed, let alone witnessed it, they shrug it off as another criminal being wiped off the street for the better and justify all that pain that's inflicted throughout the community. People seem to forget police are supposed to be protectors first and foremost, and you shouldn't mistake people asking if there were any steps that could have been taken to achieve a better outcome with siding with the criminal or hating the police. If you prefer the videos where the person puts down the gun and nobody gets hurt, you should actually try to encourage the actions that will lead to that, opposed to shooting first and asking questions later. This is pretty much as serious as the album gets, though. While there's still plenty of drugs, poverty, and incarceration, it's accompanied with plenty of fun, cheeky bars about girls and jewelry, and it's all tied together with Rick's personable style and storytelling ability. The Great Adventures of Slick Rick kind of plays like an old cartoon to me, just with more explicit themes. He'll get into all these wacky, often dangerous situations, but even when he'll leave the story off in a bad position where it looks like there's no hope for the Slick Rick character, he always manages to bounce back in time for the next episode. I feel like the title and album cover match this concept really well, and you get a perfect picture of him and the city he's getting into all this mischief in. Sometimes he'll put multiple tales together into one big story, like with The Moment I Feared. Each section details a different part of the night, with each verse gradually ramping up until at the end they climax with a plot twist where things go wrong, or the moment he feared. The first verse details him going to see BDP at the Latin Quarter, and everything's going great until he inevitably gets robbed for his flashy chains. In the second verse, he takes the train home in shame, then goes to the park where he runs into a guy he knows who's with his girlfriend. They ask for directions for their friend's place that ends up being right next to Rick's building, and he wakes up the next day with the girlfriend knocking on the door and proceeding to seduce him. He eventually gives in, and things take a turn when the elevator comes up and the boyfriend is in it. The final verse really caps off this story with Rick killing the boyfriend after he tried to take a swing at the ruler, and the girlfriend takes Rick back to their place and shows him the fortune and cocaine the other guy had stored and explains how they're basically rich now. But little does she know, Rick doesn't hang around anyone who isn't good for his health. So he kicks her to the curb and takes 100% of the riches for himself, of course. Now he's riding around town with really expensive jewelry and clothes, stunning on all the people in his neighborhood who doubted him, when once again things go south as a cop rolls up on him and has evidence for his crimes. The roller coaster of a week ends with Rick in prison, and while this final moment I feared is hardly something I can describe on YouTube, if you've heard the rumors about what goes on between certain men in prison, you can probably piece together what happened. That song is just one of the densely packed, well-told stories out of Slick Rick's infinite arsenal. One of the more famous examples is Mona Lisa, where Rick offers to buy a slice of pizza for a pretty girl named Mona Lisa that he met there. They hit it off and have some playful, kind of sarcastic banter, and then there's a hilarious moment where Mona Lisa is explaining all her different interests and traits that he asked about, and Rick chimes in after whatever she says with, as if to say, oh yeah, I hear what you're saying, but he's not really listening at all. It's such a funny and creative way to use ad-libs, and it highlights the two characters Rick plays having a back and forth, and it isn't just one versus Rick, okay, done. One versus Mona Lisa, okay, done. And then later cutting them together in order. It's one of those little details that elevates so many of the moments on this album, and the relatability and the simplicity of buying a girl you like a slice of pizza is something that I believe made this kind of an anthem in New York at the time. However, Mona Lisa doesn't end on a happy note. After sitting and talking with her for a while, his friend comes in and pulls him out, saying that she's a lowlife and they have a real party with real mature women to go to. Rick basically gets forced along until his friend hails a cab and thrusts him in. As they drive away, Mona Lisa sings a short song of heartbreak and betrayal, which is conveyed through a haunting sample of Dionne Warwick's Walk On By. This is another one of those moments in the vein of Cop Shot the Kid, I Still Hear Him Scream on Children's Story that I referenced earlier, where despite the overall levity of the great adventures of Slick Rick, there are these select spots where you get a glimpse into the dark reality behind this wacky world he's creating. While it's easy to hear certain lines out of context and think he's being misogynistic or promoting a negative message, in reality, pretty much any time he does those things, something goes wrong and he gets his comeuppance. If you want to hear a song where Rick is directly addressing kids and young people in general, probably the best example is Hey Young World, which is one of my favorite beats on here, and like pretty much all of them, it's been sampled a good 50 times at least since the release of this album. On that song, he's pleading with young people to respect their parents, not to smoke crack, and overall advising them to not be dumb and self-destructive. As far as production for Golden Age albums go, this album has some of the best instrumentals this era has to offer, in my opinion. Production for hip-hop was speeding up and evolving at a rapid pace, so Rick recruited some of the top names at the time to bring these narratives to life, like Jam Master Jay, The Bomb Squad, and Jerry Martin. But you also can't ignore the fact Slick Rick produced some of the best beats on the entire LP himself. I also think albums like this one are very relevant currently, since so many supposed old hip-hop fans complain about the current female rappers who twerk and talk about sexual stuff and pretend it's a new problem from this generation. The sexual talk in certain styles of modern rap is nothing new, just like people being gay or dressing androgynously isn't new. I was watching an old Culture Club music video and I saw some little kids there enjoying themselves dancing to the song, but if that was today, 100% without a doubt people would say that Boy George was grooming them. There's people who will paint Slick Rick as a thug and bad influence and ignore a song like Hey Young World, but then you look at something like the rap song the band Wham did in the 80s, where literally the entire thing is don't listen to your parents, don't get a job unless you completely love it all the time, and school's for fools. While again, I wasn't around then, I can pretty comfortably assume none of these hip-hop hating white people who peg rappers as bad role models said any of those things about Wham. Despite George Michael starting his first verse telling us about his street credibility, which while I don't want to judge a book by its cover, I wouldn't say it exactly comes across as the most authentic thing in the world. But enough of me kicking dead legends while they're down and can't respond for songs they made 40 years ago. My overall extremely long-winded, convoluted point is that Slick Rick debuted with a classic that, in my opinion, has a reserved spot in the top 5 hip-hop albums from the 80s. For the great adventures of Slick Rick, my 3 favorite songs would have to be Children's Story, Moment I Feared, and Teenage Love, but I also have to give a couple shoutouts to Teacher Teacher and The Ruler's Back. Thank you for watching my 25th video. We'll come back around to the 80s soon enough, but now we're going to move on to 10 albums from the 2000s that I want to share. I'm still going to attempt to have some underground stuff, but as usual I want to throw in a few more big mainstream sellers to kind of mix it up a bit so I can cover as many different scenes and movements as I can. So be sure to tune in next time to see which personal favorite from the 2000s I start off with. And be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite songs off of this feat of modern music are. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.